The sheriff arrived with a writ of possession, but the old homeowner wasn't the only one watching. While his daughter-in-law laughed as he lost everything, excavation crews were already digging beneath the estate for a secret worth far more than the house itself. What they uncovered would expose a conspiracy no one saw coming. If you love suspenseful stories packed with shocking twists, subscribe now and let's begin. The sheriff knocked on my front door just after sunrise, holding a folded writ of possession in one hand and keeping the other resting awkwardly on his belt. Behind him, parked beside a black SUV at the end of my gravel driveway, stood my daughter-in-law, Celine Dreven. She wasn't arguing. She wasn't shouting. She was smiling. Then she laughed. That sound echoed across the quiet morning, as if she had been waiting years for this exact moment. My name is Fabian Velmark, and until that morning, I believed nothing could force me out of the home I had spent decades rebuilding with my own hands. Ashgrove Manor stood on a ridge overlooking rolling hills outside Brimstone Ridge. 23 years earlier, the place had been little more than collapsing stone walls, rotting beams, and broken windows. I had purchased the neglected property after retiring as a civil engineer, investing nearly every dollar I had saved into restoring it. Every brick, every wooden floorboard, every repaired staircase carried a memory of long days and tired evenings. It wasn't simply a house. It was the last promise I had made to myself after my wife passed away, that I would preserve something meaningful for the generations that came after me. The sheriff cleared his throat before speaking. Mr. Velmark, I truly wish we were meeting under different circumstances. His voice carried genuine discomfort. He unfolded the legal documents and handed them toward me. You've been ordered to vacate the property immediately under authority of this writ. I frowned. There has to be some mistake. I sincerely hope so, he answered quietly, but the order is valid unless a court says otherwise. I scanned the first page. Commercial loan, default judgment, property seizure. The words blurred together for a moment. I've never taken out a commercial loan. The sheriff lowered his eyes. I understand your concern. No, I said more firmly. You don't understand. I have never borrowed money against this property. Not once. Before he could respond, Celine slowly approached us across the front yard. Her heels crunched softly against the gravel while she folded her sunglasses and slipped them into her jacket pocket. She looked perfectly composed, dressed more like someone attending a business meeting than a family dispute. You should have paid closer attention to your paperwork, Fabian, she said calmly. I stared at her. What paperwork? She shrugged. The paperwork that matters. Her confidence unsettled me more than the sheriff's documents. There was no anger in her face, no satisfaction born from revenge, only certainty, as though every step of this morning had unfolded exactly as she had planned. I want an explanation, I demanded. You'll have plenty of time to read the court records, she replied. The sheriff interrupted before the conversation escalated. Mr. Velmark, I'm required to give you 2 hours to collect personal belongings. After that, possession transfers to the new legal owner. I looked directly at Celine. The new owner? She simply smiled again. Not proudly, not emotionally, just confidently. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Birds chirped somewhere beyond the oak trees lining the driveway, completely unaware that my life was falling apart. I walked back inside the manor almost mechanically. Every room felt different now. The study where I had designed renovation plans. The dining room where my family gathered every holiday. The workshop filled with carefully labeled tools accumulated over 4 decades. How could a judge approve something like this without ever speaking to me? I packed only essentials into an old leather suitcase because there wasn't enough time for anything else. Family photographs, a folder containing property deeds, my late wife's wedding ring, which I had never been able to part with. Everything else would remain behind. Exactly 2 hours later, I stepped onto the front porch carrying my suitcase. Moving trucks were already arriving. Strangers unloaded equipment with astonishing efficiency. 2 locksmiths immediately began replacing every exterior lock before I had even reached my truck. It felt less like an eviction and more like an operation plan down to the minute. As I loaded my suitcase into the back seat, I glanced toward the rear of the estate. Several workers were unloading heavy drilling equipment near the oldest section of the property. Large generators followed, industrial floodlights, steel crates. I frowned. None of that made sense. If Celine had fought so hard to obtain the manor, why wasn't she preparing to live in it? Why was she preparing to dig beneath it instead? Standing beside her SUV, Celine noticed me watching the equipment. For the first time that morning, her smile disappeared. She immediately turned and barked instructions at the workers, pointing toward the rear garden as though trying to keep something hidden from my view. At that exact moment, I realized something far more dangerous than losing my home had just begun. I spent my first night in a modest room above an aging diner in Hollow Creek, 20 miles from Ashgrove Manor. The room smelled faintly of old pine furniture and fresh coffee drifting up through the floorboards. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Celine standing in my driveway, laughing while strangers claimed the house I had devoted half my life to restoring. By sunrise, I had stopped asking myself how this had happened. Instead, I began asking who had made it happen. The first stop that morning was the Brimstone Ridge County Courthouse. I carried every original property document I owned inside a weathered leather folder that had remained untouched for years. The clerk behind the records counter recognized me immediately. "Mr. Valmark," she said politely. "I'm sorry about what happened." "So am I," I answered. "I'd like copies of every filing connected to my property." She hesitated before disappearing into the archive room. Nearly 20 minutes later, she returned with a stack of certified documents almost 2 inches thick. "Everything processed through the court is here." I thanked her, carried the records to a quiet reading table, and began examining them page by page. Every document looked authentic. The signatures appeared genuine. Official county seals had been embossed correctly. The judge's approval was legitimate. Even the payment history seemed complete. If someone had fabricated this case, they had done it with extraordinary precision. For nearly 3 hours I searched for inconsistencies until one small detail caught my attention. The lender listed throughout every filing was a company called Hawthorne Commercial Finance. The name sounded unfamiliar, very unfamiliar. I searched my memory again. Nothing. I had never spoken with anyone from Hawthorne. I had never signed paperwork involving that company. Most importantly, I had never received a single letter demanding payment from them. Something wasn't right. Instead of returning to the motel, I drove across town to the public library. The reference librarian pointed me toward archived business registration records available through the state's commercial database. Less than 15 minutes later, I found the company's registration history. My heartbeat slowed, then stopped for a brief moment. Hawthorne Commercial Finance had officially dissolved 4 years earlier. The company legally no longer existed. I checked the record again. Same result. A dissolved corporation somehow appeared as an active lender in a recent foreclosure case. I printed every page before leaving. Outside, the afternoon sky had turned gray, and a cool wind swept through the nearly empty streets. Sitting inside my truck, I compared the court documents with the business records over and over. There was only one possible explanation. Someone had intentionally used the identity of a company that could no longer defend itself or dispute fraudulent paperwork. Whoever planned this expected no one to notice. I returned to the courthouse before closing time and requested to speak privately with the record supervisor. After reviewing the documents, he adjusted his glasses and frowned. "Our office only processes what arrives through approved legal channels," he explained. "So nobody verified whether this lender still existed." He sighed. "The paperwork met every legal requirement." "That isn't what I asked." He remained silent. His silence told me far more than his words. Someone had relied on procedure instead of truth. As evening approached, I drove back toward Hollow Creek, but instead of returning directly to the motel, I took the long route that overlooked Ashgrove Manor from a wooded hillside. Dense trees concealed my truck while giving me a clear view of the property below. What I saw erased any lingering belief that Celine wanted the estate for sentimental reasons. Not a single moving van had arrived. No furniture deliveries. No family vehicles. No lights inside the manor. Instead, powerful portable floodlights illuminated the rear grounds. Excavators crawled slowly across the old garden, tearing away soil with mechanical precision. Workers wearing reflective jackets moved back and forth carrying surveying equipment and long metal poles. Several large shipping containers had been placed near the excavation site, each secured with heavy padlocks. It looked less like a family home and more like an industrial project operating under strict deadlines. I raised the small pair of binoculars I kept in my truck. Celine stood beside a folding table covered with maps and rolled blueprints. She pointed repeatedly toward one specific section behind the oldest stone foundation. Every few minutes, she checked her watch before speaking with the foreman. She looked impatient, not triumphant. Impatient. That difference mattered. People eager to enjoy a new property did not order excavation crews before unpacking a single box. They searched because they expected to find something. As darkness settled over the valley, another truck entered through the front gate, carrying equipment unlike anything used in ordinary construction. Long drilling pipes, reinforced steel frames, and industrial generators were unloaded within minutes. I quietly lowered my binoculars. Losing my home had never been Celine's true objective. The manor had simply been standing in the way of whatever she believed was buried beneath it. The next morning, I was halfway through a cup of bitter coffee in the diner below the motel when the waitress walked over and told me someone was asking for me. I assumed it was an attorney, perhaps even another court official. Instead, I found a tall, gray-haired man standing outside with a worn leather satchel hanging from one shoulder. He looked more like a professor than someone involved in legal disputes. "Mr. Fabian Velmark?" he asked. "I am. My name is Professor Lennox Quarrel." The name sounded familiar, though it took me a moment to place it. Years earlier, after restoring one of the oldest wings of Ashgrove Manor, I had donated several handwritten journals and maps to the local university's historical department. Lennox had been the researcher assigned to catalog them. We had exchanged only a handful of conversations, yet he remembered me. "I apologize for arriving without notice," he said. "But after hearing what happened at your property, I believed we needed to speak immediately." His serious tone convinced me to invite him upstairs. Once inside my room, he carefully opened his satchel and removed several photocopied pages, each marked with handwritten notes and colored tabs. "Before I explain," he said, "I need to ask one question." I nodded. "Has anyone started digging beneath your property?" I leaned forward. "How do you know that?" His expression tightened. "So they have." I described everything I had witnessed from the hillside the previous evening. The floodlights, the excavation equipment, the shipping containers, Celine directing workers with unusual urgency. Lennox listened without interrupting. When I finished, he slowly spread the copied journal pages across the small table beside the window. "These came from one of the journals you donated." I immediately recognized the faded handwriting. It belonged to my grandfather. He had served as a maintenance contractor during the final years of the Cold War, though he rarely spoke about that period of his life. Lennox pointed toward a paragraph near the bottom of one page. "Your grandfather mentioned assisting government engineers with structural work beneath Ashgrove Manor." I frowned. I always assumed he was referring to the cellar. So did everyone else. He reached into his satchel again and removed an old survey map dated more than 60 years earlier. This map changed my opinion. Beneath the outline of the manor appeared a second drawing showing corridors extending deep underground. Thick concrete walls surrounded several rectangular chambers connected by reinforced passageways. I stared at the diagram in disbelief. What exactly am I looking at? A classified communications bunker. I looked back at him. "You're certain?" "As certain as historical evidence allows." He explained that during the height of Cold War tensions, several privately owned estates across the region had secretly housed emergency government communication facilities. Most records had remained classified for decades. Many were later destroyed, leaving only scattered references hidden in personal journals and forgotten engineering notes. Ashgrove Manor matched multiple descriptions, Lennox continued, but without physical evidence, nobody could prove the bunker existed. I folded my arms. If that's true, how did Celine learn about it? That is the question that concerns me most. He believed someone had been searching through declassified archives over the past year. Several historical documents connected to regional defense infrastructure had recently been requested by an unknown researcher using different identities. At first, the requests seemed harmless. Now they appeared connected. I think whoever found those records also discovered your property's location. The room suddenly felt much smaller. I replayed the previous week in my mind. The fake foreclosure, the impossible loan, the rushed eviction, the excavation beginning almost immediately after I left. Every event fit together with frightening precision. Celine had never cared about owning Ashgrove Manor. She simply needed unrestricted access to the land beneath it. Lennox carefully slid one final document toward me. Unlike the others, this page carried a faded government stamp across the top. Most of the text had been blacked out years earlier, but one sentence remained readable. Facility status, contents not officially transferred. I looked up sharply. What does that mean? It means, Lennox answered quietly, that according to the last surviving record, whatever was stored inside that bunker may never have been removed. Neither of us spoke for several long seconds. Outside the motel window, traffic moved normally along the quiet street, yet my thoughts were racing far beyond Hollow Creek. If Celine believed something valuable still remained underground, she would stop at nothing to reach it. Then another possibility struck me. If she had forged legal documents to seize my property, how many other crimes had she already committed before ever setting foot inside Ashgrove Manor? Professor Lennox Quarrel insisted we move quickly. If Celine is searching for what I think she is, he said as we left the motel, every hour matters. We drove separately to the old county archive building on the eastern edge of Brimstone Ridge, a neglected brick structure that had survived decades of budget cuts simply because no one had bothered to demolish it. Most people believed every useful document had already been digitized. Lennox assured me that the oldest engineering records had never left the basement. The archive's caretaker recognized Lennox immediately and unlocked a restricted storage room without asking many questions. Dust covered nearly every shelf. Metal cabinets lined the walls from floor to ceiling, each marked with faded government inventory numbers. The air smelled of aging paper and machine oil. We're looking for infrastructure surveys between 1961 and 1968, Lennox said. For nearly 2 hours we searched through oversized map drawers and brittle engineering binders. Many pages were incomplete. Others had sections removed with razor blades decades earlier. Whoever had classified the material had been thorough. Just as frustration began replacing hope, Lennox stopped at a cabinet labeled Defense Auxiliary Projects. I think this is it. Inside rested a flat storage box, wrapped with deteriorating cloth tape. He carefully lifted the lid. Folded beneath several maintenance reports lay an original construction blueprint. My heartbeat quickened. Across the top appeared the words, Emergency Communication Support Facility, Site 12. Site 12. Directly below the title was the survey outline of Ashgrove Manor. The blueprint revealed far more detail than the journal sketches. A reinforced concrete bunker extended nearly 60 feet beneath the oldest section of the estate. Separate chambers connected through narrow corridors. Emergency power systems, ventilation shafts, storage vaults, and secured communications rooms filled nearly every level. I studied every line. This was never just a shelter, I whispered. Lennox nodded. It was designed to operate independently for weeks. Several handwritten inspection notes had been added years later by maintenance supervisors. Most were routine observations about electrical systems and structural integrity. Then one note near the final page caught my attention. Access sealed. Inventory transfer pending. No completion date followed. No signature confirmed the transfer. Nothing indicated the storage areas had ever been emptied. Lennox leaned closer. If these records are accurate, the government intended to remove the contents, but never documented finishing the job. Could those records simply be incomplete? They could, he admitted. But incomplete records are exactly what attract people hunting valuable secrets. As we photographed the documents for reference, the archive caretaker returned carrying another folder. I almost forgot, he said. This box arrived years ago from a military warehouse scheduled for disposal. Inside were black and white photographs taken during the original construction. Workers poured reinforced concrete beneath the manor. Large steel blast doors were lowered into place by cranes. Communication antenna foundations disappeared beneath layers of earth. One photograph stood out from the rest. A convoy of military trucks parked behind Ashgrove Manor while uniformed personnel unloaded several heavy metal containers marked only with serial numbers. No description explained what had been inside them. The caretaker shrugged. That's all we have. After thanking him, Lennox and I left the archive carrying digital copies of every document. Instead of returning to Hollow Creek, we drove toward a wooded overlook facing the rear of Ashgrove Manor. From that distance, we remained hidden while maintaining a clear view of the excavation. The activity had intensified dramatically. Additional floodlights illuminated nearly the entire property despite the late afternoon sun. Excavators had already carved a massive trench through what used to be my vegetable garden. Fresh piles of dirt surrounded temporary fencing erected since the previous evening. Workers in matching gray uniforms operated ground-penetrating radar equipment, while others compared measurements against large, laminated maps. Celine stood at the center of the operation, speaking rapidly into a satellite phone. She wasn't directing movers. She was directing a coordinated search. Then something unexpected caught my attention. A dark pickup truck entered through the front gate. One of the passengers stepped out, removed his hard hat, and walked towards Celine. Even from a distance, I recognized the sharp scar running across the side of his face. Years earlier, I had seen that same man sitting inside a federal courtroom. His name was Victor Harlan. He wasn't an engineer. He wasn't a contractor. He was a professional document forger whose counterfeit land titles had ruined dozens of property owners before investigators finally arrested him. I had testified during one of those trials because my engineering reports exposed forged survey boundaries. Victor had disappeared after serving his sentence. Now he was standing beside Celine, calmly reviewing excavation maps, as though they had worked together for years. My stomach tightened. That single sight answered a question I had been asking since the sheriff arrived. The foreclosure documents had not merely been manipulated. They had been manufactured by someone whose entire career had been built on creating fraudulent legal records. And if Victor Harlan was involved, then the conspiracy surrounding Ashgrove Manor was far larger than one dishonest daughter-in-law trying to steal a family home. Seeing Victor Harlan standing beside Celine changed everything. Until that moment, I had considered the possibility that she had manipulated a few dishonest lawyers or exploited weaknesses in the legal system. But Victor was different. He had built his reputation on creating fraudulent deeds, forged surveys, and counterfeit ownership records, so convincing that banks and courts often accepted them as genuine. If he was part of Celine's operation, then every document used to remove me from Ashgrove Manor had likely been fabricated from the very beginning. Professor Lennox lowered the binoculars and looked at me. We cannot confront them ourselves. I wasn't planning to. They've already crossed legal boundaries. People willing to commit organized fraud rarely stop there. I knew he was right. The safest move was to understand exactly what they were searching for before making another decision. As darkness settled across the valley, the excavation continued without slowing. Portable generators hummed continuously while workers installed temporary fencing around the deepest trench. Several security guards began patrolling the perimeter, carrying flashlights and radios. This was no ordinary construction site. Someone expected unwanted visitors. The following morning, Lennox suggested we gather information somewhere Victor would least expect. We drove to a truck stop nearly 15 miles outside Brimstone Ridge, a place frequently used by contractors traveling between counties. According to Lennox, excavation crews often stopped there before reporting to job sites. Luck favored us. Just after 8 o'clock, one of the gray utility trucks from Ashgrove Manor pulled into the parking lot. 3 workers entered the diner while leaving the truck unattended near the fuel pumps. "We only have a few minutes," Lennox whispered. I walked casually through the parking area, pretending to search for my own vehicle while memorizing every detail of the truck. Company logos had been removed from both doors, leaving only faint outlines where decals once existed. The rear cargo compartment carried heavy mud from repeated trips across freshly excavated ground. Then I noticed a shipping manifest tucked beneath the windshield. Most of it listed equipment deliveries. One handwritten line immediately caught my attention. Vault Section B. No address. No explanation. Just those 3 words. Before I could study it further, voices approached. I stepped away and returned to my truck without attracting attention. Later that afternoon, we visited a retired surveyor named Edwin Sorrell, one of the few people still alive who had worked on government infrastructure projects during the 1960s. Lennox trusted him completely. When Edwin examined the copied blueprints, he remained silent for nearly a minute. Finally, he spoke. Site 12 wasn't important because of its location. "What do you mean?" I asked. "It was important because of what passed through it. He explained that emergency communication bunkers often stored specialized encryption equipment before distributing it to military command centers across the country. Some devices never reached their destinations because projects ended abruptly when funding changed or technologies became obsolete. Could valuable equipment still be down there? I asked. Edwin slowly shook his head. I doubt it. That answer surprised me. If nothing valuable remains, why would anyone risk forging court records to seize the property? Edwin leaned back in his chair. Because criminals don't always chase facts. They chase rumors. His words stayed with me during the drive back. Rumors. Perhaps Celine had built her entire operation around incomplete information. Or perhaps she knew something none of us did. That evening, while reviewing every document once again inside my motel room, my phone rang from an unfamiliar number. I answered cautiously. No one spoke. For several seconds I heard only faint static. Then a distorted voice quietly said, "Stop looking beneath your house." The call ended immediately. My pulse quickened. Only 3 people knew I was investigating the bunker. Myself, Professor Lennox, and whoever was watching us. Less than 10 minutes later, I heard footsteps outside my motel room. The hallway became silent. Then came the unmistakable sound of someone testing the doorknob. I switched off the lights without making a sound and stood beside the wall, gripping the heavy flashlight from my travel bag. The handle turned slowly. Whoever stood outside believed the room was empty. After several tense seconds, the door stopped moving. Footsteps retreated down the hallway. I waited another full minute before opening the door. The corridor was empty. Nothing appeared stolen. Nothing looked disturbed. Then I noticed the leather folder containing my grandfather's original journals lying open on the table. I was certain I had locked it before leaving that afternoon. The cash in my wallet remained untouched. My watch was still on the nightstand. Even my laptop sat exactly where I had left it. The intruder had ignored everything of financial value. Whoever entered my room had been searching for only one thing: the journals describing what lay beneath Ashgrove Manor. At that moment, I understood the excavation was no longer the only race taking place. Someone was desperately trying to erase every piece of evidence that could reveal the truth before I uncovered it first. The break-in at my motel room changed my priorities overnight. Until then, I had been trying to understand Celine's plan. Now I understood something even more important. She knew I was getting close to the truth. Whoever had searched my room hadn't taken cash, electronics, or anything easy to sell. They wanted my grandfather's journals because those pages contained the only surviving descriptions of what existed beneath Ashgrove Manor before government records disappeared. If they were willing to risk breaking into my room, they were becoming desperate. The following morning, Professor Lennox arrived before sunrise carrying 2 cups of coffee and a worried expression. "You look like you haven't slept." "I haven't." I explained everything that had happened the previous night, including the anonymous phone call and the attempted search of my room. Lennox listened without interrupting. When I finished, he carefully closed the journal resting on the table. "We're done collecting information on our own," he said. "It's time someone with legal authority becomes involved. I've already spoken to the sheriff. The sheriff executed a court order. This requires someone who investigates organized fraud." He reached into his satchel and removed a small notebook. "There is one person I trust." Written inside was a single name: Mara Elliston. Years earlier, she had served as a federal investigator specializing in financial crimes involving forged property transfers and shell corporations. Although officially retired, she still advised several active investigative units. By noon, we were sitting inside her modest office above a law practice in neighboring Cedar Falls. Mara appeared to be in her early 60s, sharp-eyed and calm, with the habit of studying people before asking questions. She listened for nearly an hour while I explained everything from the sheriff's arrival to Victor Harlan's appearance at the excavation site. Unlike others, she never interrupted to question whether the story sounded believable. Instead, she examined every document one by one: the dissolved lender, the forged foreclosure, the engineering blueprints, the journal copies, the photographs from the county archive. Finally, she folded her hands. "Your property isn't the primary crime," she said. I frowned. "It isn't." "No. The forged foreclosure was simply the tool. The larger crime is whatever required them to remove you so quickly." She circled Victor Harlan's name with a pen. If he's involved, this operation has experienced document specialists. They don't improvise. They prepare months in advance. Mara made several phone calls before hanging up. I still have contacts willing to verify a few things unofficially. 3 days passed with almost no news. During that time, excavation at Ashgrove Manor intensified. From the wooded overlook, we watched additional trucks arrive, carrying reinforced lifting equipment and portable cranes. Workers had erected large weatherproof tents around the deepest excavation area, preventing anyone outside from seeing what they were uncovering. On the fourth afternoon, Mara called. "I've confirmed something," she said. "The shell company hiring Victor Harlan has been under quiet federal scrutiny for almost a year." "For what?" "Illegal acquisition of restricted government technology." I exchanged a glance with Lennox. "So the bunker may simply be their latest target," Mara finished. Instead of moving immediately, however, she proposed something unexpected. "We don't arrest people based on assumptions. We let them reveal exactly what they're trying to steal." Her plan required patience. Federal investigators quietly obtained surveillance warrants covering vehicles entering and leaving Ashgrove Manor. Cameras monitored nearby roads. Unmarked vehicles rotated through observation points. Shipping records from local freight companies were quietly reviewed. Every supply order connected to Celine's temporary construction company was examined without alerting anyone. For nearly 2 weeks, nothing dramatic happened. The excavation continued day and night. More soil disappeared. More equipment arrived. Celine appeared increasingly impatient, often walking the site herself with folded maps under one arm. Then, early one cloudy morning, everything changed. One of the excavators stopped moving. Workers rushed toward the deepest trench. Within minutes, cranes rolled into position. Even from the distant hillside, I could see excitement spreading across the site. "They found something," Lennox whispered. Large floodlights remained switched on despite the daylight as crews carefully cleared debris from a massive circular steel structure buried beneath decades of compacted earth. The outline matched the blast door shown on the original blueprints. After hours of work, hydraulic equipment slowly forced the ancient door open. No celebration followed. Instead, workers disappeared inside carrying portable lights. Nearly 40 minutes later, they emerged, pushing several heavy metal containers mounted on wheeled platforms. Each container was sealed with military locking mechanisms and covered in decades of dust. Celine herself supervised their loading onto waiting trucks. She looked convinced she had finally won. What she didn't know was that every road leading away from Ashgrove Manor was already being quietly watched by investigators waiting for one mistake. And judging by the urgency on her face, that mistake was about to happen.